they're coming to school here, that they too can be leaders, they can be change makers, that they can change the world. And so what a wonderful way to host, to have them here on this day. And I think that we are all seated now. By the way, you may hear this, I'll just say it now for you all to know, that the Freedom Riders came together in the early 60s, and they've met each other in different time periods. And I heard the story that Oprah Winfrey decided, as she was finishing up her show, that she wanted to try to bring as many Freedom Riders to her studio in Chicago as she could, to have a kind of reunion, which was the biggest reunion of Freedom Riders in the history of the movement, other than when they were together. Well, today I'm really proud to say that our school has brought the second number next to Oprah, so I think we should be proud. Can't beat Oprah, but do what you can. So let me just say a few last words before we begin, and that is that we couldn't have done this without the support of a couple of organizations that have hosted the Freedom Riders with us. So besides the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, we have the School of Education, Social Work, and Psychological Sciences here that have partnered with us. Multicultural Student Affairs, the Alumni Association has been very generous. They understand the value of bringing incredible speakers like this in multicultural affairs. The Department of Race, Ethnic, and Gender Studies, which is also in our school, they also contributed to this. And then last night at the Gem Theater, we partnered with the Black Archives of Mid-America and the Gem Theater and the American Jazz Museum. So we have a treasure that is Kansas City with so much history. And I'll just stop by saying that Dr. Carmeletta Williams is part of why Kansas City is so great. She is she's a rock and roux?
Rock and roux.
She's a rock and roux. Gotta say, KU and UMKC. And she's the executive director and CEO of the Black Archives of Mid-America, and she will serve as our moderator tonight. Before Carmeletta does her work and we introduce the Freedom Riders, I also want to acknowledge Dr. David Trowbridge, who you're going to see, I'm sure, as he's super active. He's the reason, he's a history professor here at our school. He is the person who really was the glue to make this all happen. He worked with everybody to bring them here, and I'm really grateful. So without further ado, we're going to begin now. Carmeletta. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Falikoff. I am a rock and roux. I have a BA and MA from UMKC. That makes me a roux. My PhD is from KU, so I rock chalk. I'm honored to be asked to moderate this panel. It's not often that we're in the midst of such historic greatness. These people chose to change the world. They chose to put their lives on the line to make a difference. So I'm honored, I'm pleased, and I've heard some of their stories, and it's a remarkable past. We are fortunate, we're really blessed to have them here. So I'll read my sheet. This event will offer the opportunity to listen and talk with 4 leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement, from the Southern sit-ins that began in 1960 to the Freedom Rides, voter registration drives, March on Selma, and Freedom Summer. Dion Diamond, Joan Browning, Dr. Lenora Tate Magubani, and Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr. are all Freedom Riders. And between the 4 of them, the event will bring leaders, this is amazing. We'll bring leaders of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, CORE, SCLC, the March on Selma, Voting Rights campaigns, and the Freedom Summer of 1978. I want you to grasp how broad an experience they're bringing here. The 4 have deep personal ties with Martin Luther King Jr., Ella Baker, Fannie Lou Hamer, and so many others. After a talk led by me, the audience will have the chance to ask questions with the four. A few questions. Four freedom riders who represent diverse communities and experiences. We have with us Dr. Bernard Lafayette Jr., and he's authored several works about his long involvement in the American Civil Rights Movement. And his new memoir is In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma. The book shares the story of his work as one of the primary organizers of the Selma voting rights movement and the Selma to Montgomery marches. This is only one chapter of his deep involvement in civil rights movement, from the Nashville sit-ins to the Freedom Rides, and Martin Luther King's decision to appoint him as the director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1967. Dr. Lafayette was also the leader of the Freedom Summer in 1968. More information about his life and work can be found in the King Institute's Encyclopedia of the Civil Rights Movement. Joan Browning participated in the sit-in movement, picketed segregated stores and facilities, and was the, quote, last freedom rider, end quote, the final person selected to join the last freedom ride of 1961. She is one of 9 Southern women who joined the Freedom Rides, and her chapter, Shiloh Witness, and Deep in Our Hearts, 9 White Women in the Freedom Movement, tells her journey and some of the unique experiences and challenges women faced in the 1960s. More information about Joan's involvement in the movement can be found in the Civil Rights Digital Library. Dion Diamond began conducting sit-ins as a teenager in his hometown of Petersburg, Virginia. His activism continued at Howard University. He participated in a freedom ride from Montgomery, Alabama to Jackson, Mississippi. Upon the arrival of their bus in Jackson, Diamond and his fellow freedom riders were arrested for breach of peace. He was incarcerated in Mississippi for much of the summer of 1961. More information about Mr. Diamond's involvement in the movement can be found on StoryCorps. Dr. A. Lenora Magubani became involved in the civil rights movement while attending Spelman College in Atlanta, where she became a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Her first sit-in occurred in March 1960, when she participated in an attempt to integrate the Atlanta Municipal Auditorium. 2 weeks later, Dr. Tate Magubani was arrested at a lunch counter sit-in with 77 other students and Dr. Martin Luther King. She spent 15 days in the Atlanta Fulton County Jail. In December 1961, traveling by train from Atlanta, she was one of the 11 Albany, Georgia Freedom Riders who tested interstate travel. She was arrested and spent 2 weeks in the Albany city and county jails. More information about her life is available, and her papers are at Emory University. So welcome, and thank you for being here. Among their papers, among their papers at Emory University are letters that they wrote to each other while incarcerated. So I want to know, and if you'll share with our audience, how do you become a freedom rider? How did that happen? Was there a particular incident, a person, an event, a family occurrence? What was it that made you one day say, I'm going to be a freedom rider? Dr. Noor?
Thank you very much. Good evening, and thank you all for coming. It's wonderful to see all of you here this evening. I participated first in the sit-ins which took place in the early 60s, and had spent 30 days in jail on 2 different occasions with the sit-ins. But the freedom rides that took place in Albany, Georgia, which in fact was the last freedom ride that took place in the South, really came about because one evening while sitting in the office working in the office, in the SNCC office, James Foreman, who was our leader, was executive secretary of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at that time, said, you know, the law has been passed, the ICC ruling is in place, but there are some of the southern states that believe that they're immune, and they're carrying on as though the law was not there. They haven't taken down the signs, and they're still practicing segregation when you go on to the train or the bus. He said, we need to do a test case, we need to go, and he chose Albany because we had an office in Albany. So we went, and we went by train. And that's how we got started in terms of the Albany Freedom Ride. There were other freedom rides that started way back really in the 50s with the, was it Reconciliation? What was the name of it? Do you remember? That Peck was on and there was a ride that took place really in the 50s, and it was an integrated group, and they went south, and then later on there was the other freedom ride, which Bernard will talk about, that took place where John Lewis and others and other people were on going south and deciding to have an integrated group go south. But the Albany Freedom Ride was mainly to test the law which had already been passed. It had already been passed, but was not being enacted. And that's one of the things that I would like to state, that because a law has been passed, it doesn't mean that it's going to be implemented, and you have to really make sure that it is being implemented and always keep your eyes on the prize. Thank you.
As they speak, I want you to pay attention to a couple of things. They talk about the modern civil rights movement, and as Dr. Lenora just said, there was one before that. There were many human rights and civil rights movements. They were part of the modern civil rights movement. And I want you to listen as they call the roll of all of the people that were involved, some of the people that were involved in this movement. There weren't just the dozen that you hear about. There were many, many more. Dr. Bernard, your journey into freedom riding.
Well, I too would like to thank you for being here. And this is a very exciting time for me because I have been doing a lot of Zooming. And to actually see people. You know what happened to me one time during this Zooming period? I was on a Zoom call, and I thought it was 8 different religious groups from different states, church groups. I found out the next day there were 17 countries.
Wow, yeah.
I would have spoken some Spanish and stuff like that if I had known. So this Zoom thing was really, I've been doing more Zooming than assuming that we have to go. So we decided to kind of stay quiet and to do this Zooming thing. And occasionally I go because I have to. I'm on the faculty of many different colleges, universities, you know, adjunct faculty type. So I have to go. And so anyway, my wife is here with me, Kate Lafayette, and I just wanted to introduce her. she's been many different places with me, and she's a trainer as well. In fact, she got a level 2 training certificate in Israel, all places.
kind of
yeah,
trainer?
Right. Yeah. So my involvement had to do with actually an earlier period, and I'm going to try to zoom through this so we can move on, because all of us are anxious to hear your questions, by the way. So I was with my grandmother, and she used to be very entrepreneurial, and she would dress up in her clothes in the middle of the week. She was avid churchgoer, had on a hat, you know, those special kind of hats women wear, you know, high heel shoes. And on a trolley car, and I was like age 7, they used to allow you to go on a trolley car by putting your money into the receptacle by the conductor. But then if you were of color, okay, you had to get off the streetcar in the front door and walk along the tracks to the back door of the trolley car, and that's where you entered. And they had a rubberized curtain that separated you. It wasn't like the bus thing, you know, where you get so many and then you can whatever. No, it had a designated few seats for blacks. Otherwise, you had to stand up, okay? And I used to run ahead as a little boy and jump on the steps of the back door so the door wouldn't close. You know why? Because the conductor sometimes would take your money. Yes, and while you're traveling, you know, walking to the back, close the doors and take off. That's what they do to black folks, you know. So so we had a scheme, we had a strategy. So I'd run and jump on the back steps. This time, my grandmother was running, and she fell because her heel got caught in the crack around the tracks, and there she was in the middle of the street. That was the middle of the street because that's where the track was. You understand? Y'all gonna get some tracks and stuff here, okay? So y'all gonna have to adjust to that. So the middle of the street. So I jumped off the steps and tried to pull her up. No, I could not move because I was a little skinny boy. I didn't even wear short pants, you know, because I didn't want to mistake my legs for no string. So I didn't even wear shorts, but I couldn't pull her up. But I said to myself at age 7, when I get grown, I'm going to do something about this problem. And I'm told that every person around age 7 remembers something that they will never forget. And that's my something. I couldn't wait to get grown. I don't remember being a little boy. In fact, there's a movie out called Little Man. It's about me, okay? The Harlem, what is it? Harlem drama or something like that. They got a movie out. It won an international prize, by the way. So anyway, I decided at that moment that I was going to fight the segregation at age 7. And I got involved. But moving ahead real fast about the freedom rides we're talking about, when the opportunity came, I was John Lewis's roommate, and John Lewis used to talk about going to these workshops. I said, I don't want to go to no workshop. I got enough work to do. You know, I don't have any. I was janitor to the second floor, the assistant librarian, and I used to volunteer to work in the kitchen because I could wash the dishes and get some pot liquor. You know what? Yeah, you have to tell the children when you get home what that is. So anyway, John, and I'm going to conclude here, my initial involvement in the freedom rides that we're talking about was actually in 60, not 61. John Lewis and I decided that since we had already desegregated Nashville, lunch counters, all those places, we actually desegregated the Greyhound bus station lunch counters in Nashville, okay? And how you gonna integrate the lunch counters and segregate the restrooms? They go together, you know that? Yeah. So we desegregated the entire bus station. But the irony of the situation is that the buses that came through were segregated. And the bus station in Nashville is integrated. So John Lewis and I decided we're going to integrate the buses. If you want to hear the rest of that story, you can listen to Barack Obama's eulogy again on John Lewis, and he mentions both our names and how we desegregated the bus, the Greyhound bus, and we went all the way down. I was going to Florida, and he was going to Troy, Alabama, and when he got to Troy, it was at night, and his bus station was actually a gas station, we called it, and the lights were out. It was closed. And when he got off of that bus, because he was sitting, you know, on the near the door there, and I was sitting behind the driver, and the driver had actually rammed this seat, okay, back, and I was sitting behind him, and he punched a hole in my suitcase. That would have been a hole in my leg if I hadn't had my suitcase in front of me, and I kept my suitcase so in case they threw me off the bus, I wouldn't have to go up under the. And then I said to John Lewis goodbye when he got off there at night, because I didn't know what plan or strategy somebody had planned for him. But then no sooner than the bus pulled off, I thought about me. By myself, going all the way down through Alabama. We got, of course, made it okay to Tallahassee and changed buses and went on into Tampa, Florida. It was home for me. But that was my first experience with riding and desegregating the buses. So when the bus came, the Freedom Rides, that was just great for us because we'd already taken our Freedom Ride.
All right. Now, I have heard other freedom riders and civil rights workers say that their theme song, and I thought about this when you talked about watching John Lewis walk away, was "This May Be the Last Time." This may be the last time, I don't know. Yes, sir, Mr. Diamond. Did you just walk up and say, "I want to be a freedom rider"? How did that work for you?
That's a good question. I call it youthful exuberance. When kids do things, I call my involvement based on youthful exuberance. I'm a native of Petersburg, Virginia, which is a totally segregated town, about 20 miles due south of the capital of the Confederacy, which was Richmond, Virginia. Now, Petersburg and most segregated towns are very expensive. It was a totally segregated high school, which meant you had to have one for whites and one for blacks. The same thing is true about the elementary schools. The same thing is true regarding, well, not true, because there was not one for each of the races in 5 and dime store lunch counters. This is before Freedom Rides and the sit-ins. Yours truly conducted his own personal sit-in before they became popular. I would go into either the 5 and dime store with the name of Kresge or Woolworths, and I would sit at the lunch counter. The people behind the counter said, "We don't serve coloreds." And I kept sitting there. They would go for the manager. The manager would come and tell us to move. I refused to move. He got the police. By the time the police got there, I knew what was about to happen. Well, luckily, this was a good time for me to realize that I could move pretty quickly. I would go out the back door when they came in the front door. The public library was segregated. By that I merely mean you could not go into the stacks if you were of color. You had to order the books and wait for them to bring it to you. The jails all over the South were segregated, and you had to have one for each race, one for each gender. Also in the 5 and dime stores, they would have a water cooler that had over it white. The one for people of color, that was colored. Now, this is going to sound kind of corny, but I would stand at the white one. Oh, I wonder what white water tastes like. I mean, it didn't say clear, it just said white. Those things didn't change while I was still in high school. Upon graduating from high school in 1959, I enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C., which is a predominantly black institution. With the passage of time, it's become more integrated, or more people not of color, but have enrolled there. Well, to make it short, Howard University was and is still considered the epitome of black education. Now, you gotta bear with me while I go through this one. I might well be schizophrenic. I've been called colored, I've been called Negro, I've been called African American, and today I don't know if I'm African American or whether or not I am black. So if I've been all of those things, and this is who I am today, I'm trying to figure out how you put up with being a mixture, because this is not truly of a particular race. It's a mixture of several. At any rate, while at Howard, the sit-ins became very popular throughout the South. But we at Howard were not doing anything, mainly because of the fact Washington, D.C. was not legally a segregated town. But we figured we would have to do something. Right across the Potomac River, which separates Washington, D.C. from the state of Virginia, which was legally segregated. Well, to make it somewhat short, we decided we would take on Northern Virginia, there was a chain of drugstores by the name of Drug Fair. Aside from that, all of the movie theaters were segregated. We decided we would take on the Drug Fair because it was a chain. Well, over the course of the summer of 1960, we decided that's what we were going to do. We went to the drug fair and started a sit-in, joined by some white students from other schools nearby. Within a very short period of time, not only had we desegregated the chain of drugstores, not only as a drug fair, but People's and other chain drugstores. In addition to that, all of the restaurants in Northern Virginia desegregated at the same time. We did that in a matter of 3 weeks. We felt so proud that we had accomplished so much in so little time that we went back to the campus and said, now that we've done that, what else can we do around here? Well, on the other side of the Potomac, there was the state of Maryland, which also had legal segregation. What can we do in Maryland? Well, there was an amusement park called Glen Echo. This is going to sound somewhat strange, but they did not let people of color in the park. We had support of a community that was immediately next to the amusement park that was mostly of Jewish population. They related to us very easily because their homes were under control via a covenant. The covenant did not allow them to sell to to people of color. They joined us on the picket line. That community had several people who were high in the labor movement. Now, please appreciate this. One guy who in the labor movement secured the use of a big black limousine. We got usage of that black limousine. I put on an African outfit. I don't know if they would be called a dashiki or if it was just an African robe. I put on a turban. I got in the back seat with a white chauffeur in a chauffeur's uniform and a white female interpreter. Now, the people on the picket line knew what we were about to do, and they started smiling as soon as the limousine pulled up in the front of the gates. The chauffeur gets out, opens the door for me. I get out. He then goes around and allows the white interpreter out. We start walking towards the gate of the amusement park. And I get out and start walking towards the entrance. Now, they had white guards, security guards, guarding the gate. Now, this guy's looking at me and looking at the French interpreter and the chauffeur. Now, you know, D.C. is a diplomatic capital. They look at me and they can't figure out, what are we supposed to do? Now, we're thinking that we were planning to make certain that this got in the newspaper because we knew they would hardly let us in without having some consternation. They blocked us at the gate, and I pretended as if I didn't know what they were doing. And I tried to push my way through, and another security guard comes in, and I say to the interpreter, "Je désire entrer le parc maintenant." Now, that's the best my pidgin French could do. I was trying to say, I desire to enter the park now. Well, they didn't let me in. But in the newspaper on the next day, there was a big article about that and how D.C. being a diplomatic town should take that into consideration. And this is the summer of '60. I'm about to take semester-ending exams. In '61, so we went back to school. But then in '61, when the sit-ins really became very prominent, we said, we got to continue the freedom rides that Dr. Lafayette was just mentioning. I flew to Montgomery, Alabama, to continue with the people of Nashville and other locations, so people from Howard, to continue the freedom ride because we had made such an indentation and made known what was going on. Well, got on a bus in Montgomery, bound for Jackson, Mississippi, and next to New Orleans. And imagine this, please. There had already been sit-ins and riots, people trying to start the freedom ride, the burning of a bus in Anniston, and people were ready to call it off. When we got to Montgomery, and I'd like to say that thanks to local people along the way, we got the support and the usage of local homes and local people to continue. Well, I gotta get this part in.
Okay.
When we got to Montgomery, got on a bus, there were about 10 of us on this particular Trailways bus. We got to, the 10 of us and about an equal number of Alabama National Guardsmen, each with a bayonet and a rifle. We thought they were there to protect us. overhead helicopters, in front and back, state police. Now, when I said a little while ago about the youthful exuberance and how naive we were, we thought the cops and the National Guardsmen were there to protect us. Little did we know that many of them, I'm certain as soon as they got off the bus, would put on their robes, their white sheets over their bodies. The trip to Alabama, the trip from Alabama to Mississippi, I have to tell you that it's like the change of the guard at Buckingham Palace, with the cops in front of the bus, cops behind the bus, National Guardsmen on the bus, and helicopters flying overhead. Let me tell you, we felt safe. Little did we know. When we got to the Mississippi-Alabama state line, on either side of the line, Mississippi State Police on one side, Alabama State Police on the other. It was the changing of the guard as they crossed from one jurisdiction to another. At any rate, as soon as we got to Jackson, we were getting off the bus. And I don't recall now, was it Captain Ray, Bernard?
Yes, Captain Ray.
Captain Ray was the officer in charge of the people who were waiting to greet us. You're not welcome here, get off, get off. As soon as we got off the bus, we were arrested under the charge of breach of peace. For the moment, that ended my activity in the Freedom Rides. And if we have some time later, I can talk about the voter registration and the other activities that I've been involved in. When I've been asked many times before, have you ever been arrested? I had to put down on the paper, I've been arrested approximately 30 times. Please check with the FBI for dates and location.
Thank you. Okay, Miss Joan, I know that when you were young and exuberant and part of this movement, that what you heard a lot was, what's a nice white girl like you doing in this movement? How did you get there?
Well, one of the things that, one of the benefits I got from being in the civil rights movement was I had the best teachers I've ever had, and teachers whose wisdom follows me down to now. And I never speak without quoting Miss Ella Baker, who was one of those most prominent teachers of young people. And one of the things she says was, and she was 60 years old when she said this, that which touches me most is that I had a chance to work with people, passing on to others that which was passed on to me. And she taught us that we have an obligation to pass on what we learned that's useful, and so that's what I try to do. One of the things that she taught and others taught was that social change really comes from ordinary people. You don't have to be rich or famous or go halfway around the world to make the world better. You start right where you are and with the people that you are associated with. And so that's the key to expanding social justice. I grew up on a farm in the Deep South, and I was proud that when summer I turned 16, I picked 200 pounds of cotton. Cotton was the cash crop, and it's fragile. You want the weather to be dry. If it gets rained on, it reduces its value. So in high school, I took typing so that I'd have nimble fingers so that I could pick more cotton. I had a little opportunity to go to college because we didn't have the money. But Sputnik went into space in 1957, and suddenly people were alarmed that those nasty Russians had beat us in space. So they had a contest to find the smartest kids and give them some money. It was called the Star Student Competition. It was based on the SAT scores. There were 2 high schools in my county, and I was in the high school on the other side of the tracks, but I was named the star student in my county. And there was a big write-up in the county paper and what a genius I was and what great things they expected of me. And so for a few weeks, I was prouder than I had any right to be, because later there was an article saying, we will have a competition for the Negro students later. So I'll never know if I was the smartest kid in the county because they didn't let everybody compete. That's not right. Yeah, microphone. My elementary school had 2 teachers and 52 students. It was a 2-room school. And to keep me entertained, they would keep going to the library, which was a big wooden chest in the hall, and giving me books. And I would burn through those books. And finally, they gave me a book, 8.5 by 11, this thick, about 5 pounds, called The History of the County I Lived in. There are 2 stories in that they didn't intend me to take the way they wrote them. One was when the state of Georgia called a convention to decide whether to stay in the United States of America or join the Confederate States. My county had 2 delegates, and they both voted to stay in the Union. So the light bulb went off. You can live in this county and not be a Confederate, or you could at that time. But the story that made the most impact on me, it showed me something is just not right, was a story of a woman was relaying what her grandmother had told her. And her grandmother said that when she was 5 years old in Africa, she and friends went out to look for guinea eggs. And while they were looking for the eggs, they came to the river, and there was a sailboat in the river. And some white men came off the boat and came up to them and gave them what they call red flaming cloth, and said, if you want more of this cloth, we've got some on the ship. Come on the ship and we'll give you more. And the grandmother story went on. So we went on the ship and we were locked in a dark place, and we didn't see daylight again until we brought to this country and made slaves to the white people. Well, that was the slave ship Wanderer, according to this history book. And some of those people on that ship were put on a smaller boat and floated up the river to my county. So this 5-year-old came to my county to be enslaved to the white folks. Well, even at 11 years old, I know that's just not right. It's just not right that they have a competition for the smartest kid in the county and only let some of them compete for that. You know, I think segregated transportation was just not right. You know, I had become friends with some students of color at the schools at Atlanta University, and the fact that we couldn't sit together on a bus or a train or a lunch counter was just not right. And the opportunity came. That typing that I had done as a skill for picking cotton came in handy. Julian Bond would write stories about where people were having demonstrations or sit-ins or being arrested, and he would write them on this yellow paper in hand. I would type them onto stencils and make copies and put them in envelopes with addresses. He would send them to newspapers and the television stations, and he was so good that they knew if it came from Julian, they could trust it. It had been tested, it was correct. But we didn't have any money. We only had one room up over a beauty shop, and the window was so dusty we couldn't see out it, and we couldn't afford the Windex to clean the window enough to see the sunshine. So they would send me across the hall, across Auburn Avenue, to the much nicer offices of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was Dr. King's organization, to beg for stamps. And I would go up to his executive secretary, and she was always willing to open her drawer and say, honey, how many stamps do you need today? And I'd say, 53, and she'd give me 53 stamps, sometimes 55. Sometimes Dr. King would come out because he had business with his executive secretary, and he would see me, and he didn't know my name, but he'd say, oh, young lady, how are you today? How are things with you? So he was not much older than we were. He was only 13 years older than I was, and I was one of the youngest people in the movement. But he was very friendly, and he liked us young people. Like Miss Baker, he had hope for the future in part because of young people, and I have hope for the future in part because of young people. So let me stop there. And it came down to the Freedom Ride. The Freedom Rides were tried to be half white and half black, and ours definitely was. In fact, if you look at the 436 Freedom Riders, slightly more were white than black. 52% were white. When they were planning the last Freedom Ride on a train to Albany, they had 4 African Americans, and they had 3 white people, and they had room for 1 more. I was hanging out with a white student at Georgia Institute of Technology who wanted to be that 4th Freedom Rider. But he was an Air Force brat. He was in college on an Air Force scholarship, and he knew that if he were arrested, he would lose his scholarship and be sent immediately to a place we only knew then as Southeast Asia that became Vietnam. So he didn't dare be that person. I was standing there. I had been trained in nonviolent civil disobedience. I participated in sit-ins and pickets and things, so I was sort of ready, and I was available, and I got chosen to be the last Freedom Rider on the last Freedom Ride.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to ask you about that training in a minute. But first, one of you wasn't 21, and you had to get parental permission. You want to tell us?
We only had to be 18 in Georgia.
18. Okay.
Yeah, because, Georgia was the first state that allowed 18-year-olds to vote long before any other place did. So 18 was the legal age in Georgia, and I had just turned 19 that summer, so I had enough ages on me to be a Freedom Rider.
Okay.
It didn't pertain to me because I had been rather independent of my parents since way back when. The only way my parents found out about my participation was from a newspaper article.
Wow.
Yeah, I think I was 21, but that wasn't anything to do with law.
Okay. Dr. Bernard?
Yes. So, pick up where John Lewis and I left off on the Freedom Rides, our own personal Freedom Rides. Then CORE, after the Anniston, Alabama bus burning and all that sort of thing, and they stopped the Freedom Ride. Jim Peck was a businessman, a white businessman from New York, and they tried to break his brains out and that sort of thing, and he was all bloodied up. The Freedom Ride was temporarily stopped, and because there was so much violence going on. And those of us in Nashville, as I say, we had desegregated the bus station, we had desegregated the movie theaters, actually, downtown movie theaters. Yeah, white man. The Martin brothers from Columbus, Georgia, they went over there and bought up downtown theaters in Nashville and desegregated them. Okay, the Martin brothers. So we had all downtown desegregated before John Lewis and I went on that Freedom Ride I told you about. So what happened when CORE stopped the Freedom Rides because there was so much violence going on, we decided in Nashville that violence cannot stop a nonviolent movement. So we asked CORE if those of us in Nashville, and those of us in Nashville consisted of student leaders from all the different colleges there. We call it the Student Central Committee. And there was Diane Nash on there, and then Jim Bevel, and John Lewis, and Marion Barry, who was first black mayor of Washington, D.C. And we were all there. And we said, do you mind if we continue the Freedom Rides? Since they had stopped the Freedom Rides. And Core said, yeah, you could go ahead. Because, see, John Lewis was on the original ride. Now, he happened not to be involved in that violence that we're talking about because the initial violence, because he was on took a leave to go and do an interview so he could get an application to go to one of the foreign countries, all right, like Peace Corps and stuff like that. That's part of our education, by the way. You know, we don't look at that as not being in school because you're in a learning environment. And that's why he was not on there. So he had all the information, the booklets and where we would stop and everything else. And let me say this before I go any further. The Freedom Rides were not just about desegregating buses. The Freedom Rides were also about stimulating this kind of activity and action in local communities. That's why the schedule for the Freedom Rides, okay, when you arrived, you didn't necessarily catch another bus and continue. Like, for example, when we left, Birmingham and went to Montgomery, we wanted to meet with the people in Montgomery. So when we arrived on the bus, we actually, didn't go into the bus station. And I'll pick up on that, but I'll go back first and say that when we decided to go and pick up that original Freedom Ride that John Lewis went on, both of us had decided to go, and we made application. And John Lewis was going to be 21 in February of that year, but I wouldn't be 21 until July of the same year. So Core had it where you could go if you were under 21, but you had to get parental permission. So I needed to get parental permission. So what I did was I wrote to my parents, my father down in Florida, and I, sent the papers to be signed for him to send them back. And I was the first one in my family to go to college, so I assume he might think it was something related to, financial aid or something like that, So I didn't hear anything from him, and our time was running out for me to be able to make the application in time. So I told him, I called on the phone, and I said, Daddy, I said, did you get that letter I sent to you? Because I sent a special delivery, And he said, yes, I did get a letter, yeah. I said, oh, I'm glad you got it. I thought it got lost in the mail. Could you sign it and send it back right away? There was a moment of silence. He said, do you think I didn't read it? And I said to myself quietly, I was hoping you wouldn't read it. Just sign it. I said, well, okay. I said, could you just sign it and send a special delivery back so I could get it, right away? So I could. And you know what his response was? Do you think I'm going to sign your death warrant? That's the way he interpreted, okay, getting on the Freedom Rides. Your death warrant. And so I couldn't go on the ride out of Nashville. And so when the Corps had stopped the rides because of the violence, those of us as students in Nashville picked up on it. We made Diane the person who would be our spokesperson in the media and that kind of thing, because we always wanted people to understand what we were doing. So we had flyers. We didn't just assume things. And David Happerstam, who was a reporter, in Nashville, we allowed him to come into our meetings, our planning meetings, so he could listen to everything we had to say, so it wouldn't be any misunderstanding. So when he wrote his articles in the newspaper, they were designed to win people over. And that's what the whole thing was about. making it, you know, in a way that people would want to be part of this change. Because we know if there are enough people of goodwill, we can make the change come. And so we got the reporters doing it. And Haberstam's, you know, reporters write articles, but they also edit it. And sometimes your editor, you know, a paper might not like certain things, and so they might get, you know, edited out. So David Haberstam was able to write the same thing in 3 different ways. So if you start editing and taking things out, you didn't lose anything. Okay? All right? So that's the story there. And I think I should say that when we got, I want to get over some ideas now. In nonviolence, it's not just protesting, okay? But it's understanding people who behave differently and try to help understand why they behave that way. So it's standing under people. That's understanding. So you don't allow folks' behavior to cause you to react. One example on the Freedom Ride. So here we are, we made it down to Birmingham, and they arrested John Lewis and his first group. I was in charge of the second group, because we divided into 2 groups out of Nashville. In case if one group didn't make it, the other one did. So rather than going on the bus, because they had taken them out of, arrested them, and put them on a bus and brought them back to the state line in Anniston, Alabama, and put the Freedom Riders out at midnight on the state line, out there in the dark. Boy, so we sent Leo Lillard down in a car to pick them up and bring them back. But we launched the second group without knowing what happened to the first group, that they were being brought back in the police car. So we went by train, I did. Then I sent other 5 by car. And so we rendezvoused back. So here we are sitting up all night in the bus station, waiting room, trying to get a bus to Montgomery. Kind of the same thing that, you know, Dion was doing. So that was our pattern. So what happened is that I, you know, was in charge of the second group. So as we went and got on the bus, tried to get on the bus, and the bus drivers wouldn't ride us if we were Freedom Riders. When he saw black and white folks together trying to get on the bus, he was suspicious. So he says to me, how many of y'all from the Co? Co? Well, nobody there was from Co. He said, how many of y'all from the NWACP? National White People, no. Nobody was from Co, I mean NWACP. So we were being honest with him, you know, we weren't from nothing like that. He said, I got one life to give, and I'm not gonna give it to Co or the NWACP. And so we agreed with him that we weren't gonna give our life to nothing like that either, you know. So he wouldn't ride the bus. I was there all night. Now here's the point I want to make. In nonviolence, you always stay in control of yourself. Don't let people get you to behave in such a way that you destroy the goal for yourself that you're trying to reach. You have to be in charge. And if I get a chance, I can tell you about what's in my book. But so I'm sitting in the bus station.
But can we go back to that for a second? You know, he says, you're in control, you're nonviolent. it didn't come automatic, right? There was training involved for all of you
Yes.
to learn how to be nonviolent.
Yes.
You talk about that a
Yes.
bit?
Well, the training was very important
Okay.
for us to be able to do that. So it's not just protesting something. You talk about change. That means you have to understand, okay, how the change can come. Who has to be involved? First, you got to change folks' minds and the way they think. But you also got to make sure that you change the way you respond to violence.
Yeah, but you
And
had
it's not
camps
easy.
too, right? Right?
Yeah.
There were training camps and
Yes, we had
Dr. Lenore,
Yeah.
go ahead. He has to share his microphone with you.
Oh, I haven't finished yet.
Oh, I thought you were there.
No,
I thought we
I was
were
going to give you
moving
an example.
Oh, okay.
Just on the Freedom Rides, when I was sitting in the bus station, we sat there all night. I went to sleep. Well, when you go to sleep, you can't help that. You get sleepy, you got to go to sleep. Okay. So sitting there all night in the bus station. Every time a bus comes going to Montgomery, we got up and then we had to wait. So I'm there asleep in the bus station, up all night. All of a sudden, splash! I thought I was dreaming. Somebody threw a cup of cold water in my face. And I shook, and I looked up, and there was a Ku Klux Klanman. That's the closest I ever been to one. He was standing up looking at me. I'm sitting down, and he's standing over me, looking down at me with the cup in his hand. And see, when you're in the white waiting room in those days, they had water fountains, so they had cold water. In the black waiting room, they had regular water, okay? And that cold water, boy, I'm telling you. So I shook and my head and looked around, and the whole bus station, the waiting room, was full of Klansmen with white robes. I've never seen that many Klansmen and it being that close to me. There was only one that had a black robe, and that was Robert Shelton, the imperial wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. A black robe with a serpent on the back of it. Okay? So my immediate thought is they did appreciate black. And their leader wore black, the rest of them were white. And so I looked, our eyes met, and he was waiting for me to react to this cold water on me. Now, here's an example of nonviolence that we learned. First of all, when I realized the circumstances and what had happened, I looked up at him with kind, inviting eyes. Your eyes speak louder than your words, by the way. Okay? Yeah. You can say a lot with your eyes. And I looked at him in the kindest way. And I had a little smile on my face as I looked at him. He was all frowned up. You know what I said to him? Thank you. And he was stunned. I said, thank you. I wasn't pretending because, hey, I didn't need to be asleep in a bus station full of Klansmen. So I really appreciate him waking me up because I need to be able to see what's going on. You know what I'm talking about? And so the point is, he didn't throw any more cold water on me. He didn't want to help me out in any way, so that was a mistake. So even his evil act, I transformed it into, okay, a helpful action rather than accusing him of making a mistake. His intentions were but his actions result. So it's what your result is going to be in the course of your action that makes a difference. I didn't get any more cold water thrown on me. He walked away. So my point is, we must always stay in control. Always keep your goal in mind. That you want him to be a kind person, so you have to take whatever actions he has and transform that action, if possible. Not always possible, but if possible, bring the best out of people. And the only way you can do that is bring the best out yourself.
All right. All right. Is there, that's an amazing experience, and I know that you've had many and many and many of them. Is there one in particular that defines the way you reacted or learned to react during this movement as a freedom rider?
I learned as a child, I had an older brother whose greatest joy in life was aggravating me. And I learned that if I responded, Mother would say, punish both of you. But if I didn't respond, he would get his just desserts and I would go free. So I think that was a preparatory lesson in nonviolent reaction, the kind that Dr. Lafayette is talking about.
Bernard and I and others within the movement differ on whether or not nonviolence, am I on or off?
Yeah.
Whether nonviolence is a philosophy or a tactic. I've never had any training whatsoever that Bernard talks about in terms of nonviolence. I merely used the thought that, hey, the group out there, they've got the guns, they've got the politicos. I wouldn't stand a chance trying to rebel. I always said that if I'm on a picket line or if I'm sitting at a lunch counter, if I'm doing something that can be considered movement-oriented, I am nonviolent. But if I'm walking down the street and somebody attacks me, spits on me, I'm probably going to try to lose my shoe in their butt. That's not encouraging for people who believe in nonviolence as a philosophy. But I did learn not to try to fight it. When you're outnumbered and you're outgunned, that's about the best I can put it.
All right. All right. Dr. Lenore? Would you have that mic?
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
One of the things in nonviolence that's very important is never to lose sight of why you're there, what your goal is. If you do that, you find that's when you go off the rails. And when we had, before I did have nonviolent training, and before any group that I led went out, we had nonviolent training, so that people would know how to react, when to react, and also to help change them, because people just don't grow up nonviolent. It's something that you have to learn in order to change. You know, it has to be from within. So people learned, if someone spat on you, remember while you're there, you know, when you get ready to, when you think, well, I'm going to strike them back, remember, what is my goal? What is my purpose? I'll give you an example. In the sit-in movement in Atlanta, I had a group, and the store was McCrory's. McCrory's, it was like, McCrory's was very much like like a Woolworths. It was similar to a Woolworths. And all of the students were seated down, were sitting down, and I was checking to make sure that everyone was fine. And as I walked around to check, there was this elderly white gentleman who was there, and he had on these grosgrain shoes. I will always remember those shoes for life. And what he did as I walked around, he kicked me in my ankle, and I sort of jarred, and I kept on going, and I went to the other side, and he caught me in the other ankle. And I was still going, and one of the members of the group came over to me and said, "Lenora, if he comes back again, I'm going to hit him." He was going to take him out. And I had to say to him, with tears in my eyes, I said to him, "You will immediately get off the line and you will go to the headquarters." Because I knew that if he had that moment of satisfaction of hitting that man, there were other people in the store who were around watching, just waiting for something to happen, waiting for us to react. We could have had a riot on our hands. Someone could have gotten hurt, and someone could possibly gotten killed. So it was remembering the goal of why we're there. What was the purpose of us being there? It wasn't to get spit on. We didn't want to get, someone spitting. But the purpose was to bring about justice, to bring about equality, to bring about respect. As a result of my ankles, I did nothing about it because I didn't want the movement to stop. I mean, very often you got injured and you didn't go back, you didn't do anything because you didn't want to give any reason to authorities in the school or any place else to say, well, that's enough, you students just need to stop this, or come around with any type of, what should I say, any backlash. So I didn't. I'm paying for that today, but the goal was met. There was an amusing story with the Klan. One day we used the post office as sort of our headquarters, because there was a little petition there and we could lodge there, and anytime we sent anyone back, you said, wait there at the post office and someone will come and get you. And we had a shortwave radio that went back to our office on campus. And the Klan decided that they were going to picket us. So they came and they were marching around the post office. They couldn't do anything because we knew that the post office was federal property. Therefore, they could not do anything, and they were walking around, marching with their white caps on and their sheets or whatever they had, and they were just marching. After a while, they did in fact leave, but we thought it quite amusing to see them, just walking around, sort of like trying to intimidate us, which they could not do, because we were fully protected, knowing that we were on federal property. But the point that I want to make is that you have to always be conscious of, why are you there? Why are you participating? What is it that you hope to accomplish? And that's something that we always tried to make people be aware of before they went out, so that they didn't lose sight of that goal. My trainer for the first sit-in we had in Atlanta was C.T. Vivian, who was a stalwart in the movement and had been through so much during his lifetime. He's no longer with us, but he came and taught us the tenets of nonviolence. Sometimes it was Dr. King who would be on campus and would give a lecture, and we would attend. Or he would attend our committee meetings. He would attend our committee meetings and talk to us. And before we went on something, we would call him in, and he would give us pointers and help us to understand what nonviolence was all about. And it isn't about just reacting, it's about a changing of the mind, a changing of the heart, and understanding the purpose of what it is you're trying to do.
Great. I have two questions. One is, this is such hard work, such stressful work. What were the markers that you saw that let you know that you were on the right path, that things were being accomplished, that there were changes being made?
I hope people understand that the Freedom Rides were obeying federal law. We were obeying two Supreme Court decisions, one that was handed down when I was only 4 years old. It said separating people by race on transportation was unconstitutional. There were lawsuits that were brought to the Interstate Commerce Commission that repeated that, and then another case out of Selma in 1960. So we were obeying the law. And it was not the Albany Freedom Ride was not our first effort to test whether these things were going to be obeyed. The Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, got the Interstate Commerce Commission to issue a ruling that as of November 1st, 1961, those signs have got to come down. And they did in many places, and people were really rude and ugly, but they took the signs down. At midnight on November the 1st, Jim Foreman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Bob Zelder, Bernard Lee of Dr. King's organization, and several of us went to the two bus stations in Atlanta to test whether the signs had come down. And they had not. My direct orders and Bob Zellner's was to be the observer, to see what happened and avoid arrest and hightail it back to the SNCC office and write up a report. So when Jim organized the Albany Freedom Ride, it was not his first effort to test whether Albany was going to obey. In fact, there was an African American state college in Albany and a very active NAACP youth council, and they had been arrested 6 times trying to desegregate Albany. So it was a last-ditch effort to try to get them to obey the law that we were obeying. So I think that's important. The historians call the Freedom Rides a pivotal moment in American history, and they called it that because people had been trying to desegregate transportation at least since 1884. Many people had tried it many times in many places. So we were not the first. We were, in a sense, the last. And they call us a pivotal moment in American history because they say that these young people seemed to court martyrdom, recklessly throwing their bodies against the very walls of segregation and willing to take whatever consequences. And the other thing that makes us a pivotal moment in American history was that we inspired other people who had other issues. Second wave feminism, the environmental movement, and the one that gives me courage when I'm depressed is I see the cutouts on the sidewalk and realize the disability rights movement was the most successful of the movements that came out of this.
Okay. Mr. Dion?
I really don't know how to answer that. Over the next 2 year period of time, the Freedom Rides were not the end of my participation. I had lost that semester out of school, and I decided, oh well, as long as I've done that and I'm out of school, I might as well see what I can continue to do. I became a, quote, field secretary, if you will, for SNCC. one of my first assignments was to go to Macomb, Mississippi, to start work on voter registration in the South. And I think more than anything else, I was dispatched to Holly Springs, Mississippi, which is 49 miles due south of Memphis. While I was there in the second year out of school, I was sent to Columbus, Ohio, to the University of Ohio, where an annual conference of the National Student Association was being held. I was sent there to attempt to find volunteers to come south for Freedom Summer. Well, when I went over from Holly Springs, which is really a short distance away from Columbus, Ohio, how shall I put this? I was asking people in the audience for volunteers. While walking across the floor, I saw this newspaper article in someone else's hand that really said no more than persons of color who have a college degree are getting decent jobs. And when I saw that, and you have to understand, I started undergrad school in '59. I'm talking about 1962, I suppose, when I started this journey as a field secretary. I said out loud, you know, I think it's time for me to get back in school. These guys who did nothing but stay in school, and they're reaping the benefits of some of the activity that I participated in. I said that out loud, and there was this guy standing next to me, and he said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Would you be interested in coming to the University of Wisconsin?" And I said, "Hell yeah." Well, he said, "Don't move." He walked off across the floor, came back with what I thought was an elderly gentleman. And what you have to understand, at that particular age, anybody over 30 was considered elderly. He came and said, "Would you be interested in coming to the University of Wisconsin?" And I went again. This time I didn't use hell, I just said, "Yeah." He said, "What kind of grades do you have?" And I said, A minus, B plus. He said, "Can you get a transcript?" I said, "Sure." Well, this is like this is like August 29th, 27th. On September the 9th, I enrolled as an undergrad student at the University of Wisconsin. Now, many people hear me talk about unintended consequences of participating in civil rights activities. I matriculated there, and when I finished my studies at Wisconsin, I took a job in Washington, D.C. That was one of the first times that I had to fill out that form about I've been arrested 30 times. After I took this job, after work at it for 2 years, someone asked me, being aware of my civil rights activities, would I be interested in going to Harvard? If I said, "Hell yeah," before, this time I said, "Hell yeah!" At any rate, that's where I did my undergraduate, my graduate work. So I think what I'm trying to say is, sometimes you really don't know the consequences of your work. So if you're doing the right thing, more than likely, you'll get paid back manyfold.
All right, thank you. Dr. Bernard, for you, what were those steps? What were those markers that said to you, "Job well done," or "I know we're on the right path," or "This is essential work and I'm glad I'm a part of it"?
Well,
Answer her question.
when I finished the Freedom Rides, and because I have to tell you, I've been arrested a lot too, in different things. And the my mother always wanted me to go to college, finish college. And that's what she should always, emphasize. So I wanted to satisfy her too, because she was very interested, and I was the first one, the oldest child, be an example for the rest of them. And so I, whenever there was opportunity to go to college, I would zip in, even if I zipped out, okay? So I went to the American Baptist College, and of course, when I returned after the Freedom Rides and that sort of thing, I decided I wanted to go ahead and finish my undergraduate work and and move ahead. I went to Fisk University and got some, credits and that sort of thing, et cetera. And I then transferred my credits from Fisk back to the American Baptist College. And I was able to finish the American Baptist College, and I went to a special program. I think it was called CLEO program or something like that. Those who are lawyers might know. It was in Iowa, and it prepares you for law school. So I got accepted at Boston University Law School because I wanted to study law and be able to be prepared to deal with legal issues, not so much as a lawyer, but as one who was arrested many times. It'd be good for the client to know some law.
Yeah.
In fact, while I was in law school, it was during the time when they had the Kent State.
Oh.
Okay, and I happened to be the editor of the newspaper there in law school. Okay, I think it was called The Comment. Yes, that'd be the name of a law school newspaper, Comment. So they were turning out all the schools, closing them down because they were protesting, what was going on at that time. And I wanted to finish law school, but I was more concerned about the other seniors. Because if you close down the law school in the middle of the semester, those who are supposed to graduate won't have enough credits to, or time. So it was mainly for them. So this committee had gotten together among our law school students and was ready to close the school down. So I said, I better join this committee because I know about strategy and stuff like that. So I told them, I said, okay, let's do what you want to do in terms of closing the school down, but let's do this. Let's make sure that the entire school, including the faculty members, agree with it. Because the other schools in Boston University was closing down. That was clear. They weren't going to school, okay? Because of the Kent State thing and all the other stuff that was going on. So I joined that committee and I said, well, here's the way we want to do it. We want to hear the best arguments for closing the school down, and we want to hear the best arguments for keeping it open. Because good lawyers are supposed to be able to argue either side. That's when you have a good lawyer. No matter what side, you're supposed to be able to, uphold the law and argue to win. So I said, now the way we want to do this is we want a student, you, for an example, who in here is a professor so-and-so favorite student? which one of y'all students in here is professor? So, okay, what I need you to do is to go to your professor and get your professor to give you the best arguments for closing the school down. Okay, who's another favorite student of professor? All right, I want you to go to your favorite professor and get the best argument for keeping the school open. Because you'll be able to, okay? And then we're going to have a forum and bring everybody together and hear the best arguments, and then we're going to decide what we're going to do with our school. So that's what they did. And I chaired the meeting. And they had the argument on this side and the argument on that side. And they were all good arguments because they got the, support from the faculty members. And so what happened is that when I stood up, I said, I'm in favor of closing the school down. And everybody cheered up. I said, now we want the professors to stay in their class, in their office, so that we can continue doing our studies and doing our papers. That's how law students learn, they have to do papers and stuff. So now the question is whether the school was open or closed. Because the teachers and professors are there, and so therefore the professors continue to get paid because the school was not closed. Because when they closed the school, okay, it's a question of whether how you're going to pay professors to teach when they're not teaching. Okay? So it was an interesting kind of scenario there. And so they all agreed, and the professors stayed open. And I said, what we want to do as students is research on the kind of issues and problems. We went all the way to Jackson, Mississippi, where another student had gotten killed, not just at Kent State. So the point I'm making here is that when you get into a situation, look at all sides and then try to bring out the best. And you're always looking in the movement for coalitions, bringing people together in groups. That's what Martin Luther King was all about. That's why the MIA, yeah, okay. Now, one thing I want to tell you what you hadn't thought about. Guess what? While we were talking about desegregating the buses, and we're trying to get to Montgomery, Alabama, guess how the local people came to the bus station? On an integrated bus, because they already had the Montgomery bus boycott. Integrated local bus coming to get on a segregated interstate bus. You get my point? So that was part of what the Freedom Ride was all about, stimulating local community. Shreveport was already desegregated, local buses. Mobile, the local buses were desegregated. Okay? And we're trying to get these interstate buses desegregated. But you have to use the resources that you have in each community to help bring about that change. So that's another strategy that Freedom Rides was all over. Now, after Freedom Rides, we served our term in jail. I stayed in, so Bevel was from Itta Bena, so we didn't have to go anywhere because he was already in Mississippi. That was home for him, Itta Bena, Mississippi, okay? So I stayed with him, and that's how we recruited all of these local Jackson, Mississippi students. We stayed there, we set up office, and we trained them. That's how we got 42 people on the Freedom Ride from Jackson, Mississippi in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And we got rearrested.
Thank you.
But, okay?
Dr. Lenore?
Yeah.
It's interesting how things happen. I was involved in the movement while I was an undergrad, and we planned the movement undergrad, and we used to have meetings in the dormitories, and I was just talking with a friend today. one of the house mothers, for example, because we were going out to meetings and coming in very late, gave us the key to the dormitory so we wouldn't wake anyone up, and we could go and come as we pleased. And if we were going to do anything, we would confide in her and let her know. The faculty at Spelman, and the faculty, I guess, at Atlanta University, because there were students who were involved there, they were in school all the time, but we had our books, and we got our assignments, and I remember drawing up a schedule, which I have, which is at Emory, if anyone was interested in looking at it, which had study periods. So we weren't just sitting in jail, just sitting. We had a period of time where we had to study, and we had our books, so that when we got out, we could in fact continue classes. And what the faculty did was they had special classes in their homes and in the school in order to help us catch up and to make sure that we were prepared for our exams. So somehow or the other, all of us graduated. All of us graduated. Now, while I was in undergrad school, when I came out, I went on to, while I was in undergraduate school, I remember that the dean of the School of Social Work was Whitney Young. And Whitney came over one day and he said, "Lenora, when are you coming over to the School of Social Work?" I said, "Well, I'm still here." He said, "No, but you can apply and you can go when you finish." So when I finished, I did go to the School of Social Work, and I got in and I was there. And while I was there, I was volunteering for SNCC. And that's when the evening that James Foreman said, some of these states are not following the law that was passed in 1961, and they need to follow it. We need to have a demonstration, not a demonstration, but we need to test the law and bring about a suit. We were not planning to go to jail when we went to Albany. What we were planning was to test the law, which was already in existence. And we did that. And I remember going and saying, well, I'm not going to jail, so I don't need to take any clothes. And maybe I should tell someone.
Yeah.
And I told one classmate, I said, if I don't get back by 7 o'clock, call someone. But one of the things I didn't take any clothes, but for some reason or the other, I took a toothbrush. And so I had a toothbrush with me. And we got on when we got on the train, we were an integrated group. Joan was a part of that group, and the 11 of us got on the train. They separated us by color. And so that was the first step in terms of filing a suit, because the trains were supposed to have been integrated. We went on train. We chose Albany because Albany had an office, a SNCC office, so we could let them know that we were coming. We got on the train and we were separated, and Bob Zellner kept coming from the white car into our car and exasperated the conductor to the point that when he was getting ready to get off, he said, I really want to see my family tonight, and when it stops, if you could just stay in your car and let me get off at the next stop, and then you can come in, and it's okay. So Bob said, yes, sir. And at the stop, it was about 2 stops before we got to Albany, and he got off, and Bob came and rode with us the rest of the way. Now, when we got to Albany, we were met by the staff and a number of students from the university, And the welcoming party from the city was Chief Pritchard. And he was there, the chief of police. And I will never forget that we went into the white waiting room and sat down for a minute because that was the last stop. And then Jim said, well, let's go outside. And we went outside, and immediately, you're under arrest. And he arrested all of us, and he arrested Charles Sherrod, he arrested Charlie Jones, and he arrested someone who had just come up. I mean, she got out of the taxi, and it was like, you're under arrest. And Bertha Goba, because she, in fact, had been a part of the movement and had been arrested before. So they assumed that she was a part of it. So Jim, in a very gentle way, said, excuse me, sir, would you tell us what the charges are, what you're arresting us for? And his response was, I don't know yet, and put us in the paddy wagon and sent us, and we all went to the city jail, which was the most despicable place I have ever seen in my life. And if there's anything that remains in my memory, I remember the rats and the roaches, both of which, if I see a mouse, I call it a rat. If I see those large roaches, as they say, I'm out of here. What they did was they separated, again, the whites from the blacks. And I never saw Joan again until we got out, when we were all released, and she was released before me. But we had a cell, which was, the white cell was over there, and there was a brick wall, so, but we could talk and we could send letters. But when we got out, getting back to school, I went back to school, we all followed our lives, and I went back to school. Although something very beautiful happened, we got out, and when we got out, there was always the support of the Albany community. The same clothes that we had on when we went into jail, 15 days later, were the same clothes we had when we came out of jail. And C.B. King, who was the lawyer, I remember, his mother had this beautiful store in the middle of this dirt road. It was called the Swank Shop, which still exists. And it had these very fine clothes in it, and the ladies used to go there to get their hats, to go to church and their clothes. And they took us there, and she said, give these children whatever they need.
Wow.
And that's how we had a change of clothes. Many people were willing to put up their homes for bail, which is one of the reasons why we said no bail, jail, no bail. And we always did that because people could have lost their homes. Some people lost their jobs because they were supporting us. And one of the, and some people, you wonder why some people were even involved. There was a lady who at the time was 60, and I interviewed her and I said, why are you here? And she says, I'm here for freedom. She says, I don't want my children and grandchildren to go through what I've gone through. So we had always had the support of the community. When I went back to school, I remember that in graduate school, that the faculty had a meeting as to whether to put me out of school or to keep me in. And one professor came to my defense and explained why I was there, what I was doing, and the vote turned around, and I did graduate. And
Great.
while I was in jail, I remember Jim saying to me, "Why don't you become a field worker? Will you become a field worker?" And we wrote letters on toilet paper, paper towels, whatever was around that you could write on, we wrote. And we passed them through the guards that were there. Not the guards, I'm talking about the trustees. These were prisoners. So when they would bring the food, the letters would be underneath the plate. And so that's how we smuggled them. And there was one pipe in there, and when you turned on the water, the pipe shook. So we would turn on the water, and that meant message received. You know, that was our method. And so we found out what was going on, where people were, and Jim sent me in one letter, and the letters are in protection at Emory, and he said, "Would you become a field worker?" And I said, "No, I want to finish school. However, when I go back and I get a job," because I did graduate in '63, I said, "Anyone that's coming from the South, send them, they can stay with me." And most of the people that came through stayed with me, and that is how I formed a very close relationship with people like Fannie Lou Hamer, who one day I was sitting at home and he said, "Mrs. Hamer is coming to stay with you." I said, "Okay, fine. She's most welcome," and she came. And that's how I learned about her story and how she was beaten to a pulp, and how the prisoners, she had the prisoners sit on her, they had the prisoners sit on her leg under gunpoint, and another one beat her with blackjack with the gunpoint while the jailer fondled her. And another person, Anel Ponder, you knew Anel?
Yes.
And when she said that she was in that group, and Mrs. Hamer said she looked up and saw her coming by. This was before they came in to beat her, and her face was bloodied. You know, they had beaten her so. And I'd heard recently that she never was the same after that. People ask, what happened to some people? There were some people that were affected mentally and physically, but she never really recovered. She recovered, but she didn't recover, if you know what I mean. These are just some of the experiences, but that didn't stop people from not working. Mrs. Hamer always said, you know, she was happy to be able to upset the apple cart. And so she was always there. And up until her death, when she could no longer do anything, did she, in fact, stop her work. I'm very proud that her first two grandchildren, her two children, because she couldn't have children, because they had, I want to say castrated, but they had given her a hysterectomy, and she did, in fact, testify the federal government. And the reason was they said, well, you don't need it anymore, so we took it out. She went in for something else, and so she raised 4 children on her own, and one of the children she raised, who was married, who became married, had 2 children, and the first one was named for me, the second one, they both were my godchildren, and they're all gone now. And that's a whole generation of royalty of, we call it royalty of freedom fighters that is gone, because Jackie was the last, and she just died 3 weeks ago. So I still feel that. But that was, those were some of the things that keep you thinking when you're down and you sort of like are ready to lose hope, you begin to think of the sacrifices that people made up until their life and how it affected their life. And you have to go on and you have to fight.
And we're not surprised when we hear her say that she's sick and tired of being sick and tired. So we're not surprised when we hear her say that she was sick and tired of being sick and tired.